Look at you guys, you're great. Keep them going, keep them going. Ready? Freeze. If you've got a ball, would you please stand up? If you got a ball, come on, there's a prize patrol looking for you. If you've got a beach ball, stand up. Prize patrol, will you take the prizes to them? Thank you so much. Thanks for playing with me this morning. It's awesome to be here with you. For the next 45 minutes, we're going to go on a journey. Actually, we're just going to begin our journey. And through this journey, you're going to develop what's called your leadership compass. Now, this is important because your leadership compass is what's going to build a framework for you as you move forward to become the kind of leader that people want to follow. My clicker. When I was a kid, I used to love to play follow the leader, especially if I got to lead. Any of my peeps out there? Yeah, I was the only one that liked to lead? Come on. But what I noticed about follow the leader was that there were some people that were more fun to play with than others. So what we want to learn to do is become the kind of leader that the other kids want to play with. And as we get started this morning, I want to ask you to play Let's Pretend with me for just a moment. I want you to go back in your memory and just pretend that we're in a conference room. And in this conference room, you're just a fly on the wall. And you're watching and listening as I'm talking to the president of the company, much younger Susan, talking to the president of the company. And I learn that I'm not quite as awesome of a leader as I thought I was. So we were there in my review and coming into the conference room, and he says to me, Susan, you've been doing a really good job. And I said, great. And I got to tell you, I remember nothing else about that review except for the last 5 minutes. And it went something like this. You've been doing an awesome job, but as a part of this review process, we asked your team to give us some feedback. And they said, you were hard to work for. I was crushed. I had been working so hard. You see, I came into that conference room really excited. It was my first real full year as a manager and leader of that team. I thought I was doing a good job. Our numbers were good. We were exceeding our budgets. Our projects were on time. The team was getting along, but they said I was hard to work for. So I asked him, well, what's that mean? And he said, I don't know. They just said you were hard to work for. And I said, well, okay, I can be kind of a direct communicator. So Marcus is laughing. I can be kind of a direct communicator. So I said, well, have I done something to hurt someone's feelings? He said, no. They seem happy, and the team is working well. They just said you're hard to work for. And I said, well, okay. Tell me a little more. And he said, well, they said you have high expectations. Now we're getting somewhere. High expectations. Should I lower my expectations? Oh, no, we like what you're doing. Right? You're getting the numbers. That's great. Okay. What should I do differently? And he said, I don't know. Just go and try not to be so hard to work for. What in the world am I supposed to do with that? Here I am, a young manager, just try not to be so hard to work for, really? In that moment, I felt like I was back on the playground, playing follow the leader, but I looked around and there wasn't anybody following me. I wasn't leading, I was crushed, and I didn't really know what to do. The game started out happy, everybody was having a good time. Things were going great until they weren't. Right? All of a sudden, I'm trying to figure out what in the world, how am I hard to work for? So I said, what went wrong? I began to think, this conversation really is what set me on the path to becoming and doing the work to really become a good leader. And as I began to think about this follow the leader game, I thought about what happened that turned the game from what was fun to tension and frustration. And I don't know, if you think back to the playground, maybe you didn't play on the same playground I did, but usually it ended one of a couple of ways. The kids either, some would stick with the leader, right, and hang out. Others would just completely mutiny and get their own leader and go a different direction. And some would just quit and go home. Well, okay, what do we do about that? Well, I think the better question is not what happened, but why did it happen? So if you think back to your time on the playground, why do you think the game started going wrong? What happened? I think we have some catch boxes. We just get some to shout them out. Do we have those? No? Cheaters. Cheaters? People cheated? Yeah. Some people didn't follow the rules. What else?
Ego.
Ego? What do you mean ego?
People have big egos.
Oh, yeah. Like they wanted to lead and they had big egos. Yeah, that's true. Anything else? Sometimes I might have been a little bit bossy. I don't know. Maybe. Probably nobody in this room ever was. Sometimes maybe the rules weren't clear and we didn't really agree on how we were going to proceed. And if we're honest, aren't we still struggling with some of the same things in the business community today? I mean, as a leader, I think I'm clear. I don't think I'm hard to work for. But everything's going along just fine until, we have this again. I have some good news and bad news. In fact, I think yesterday somebody said this in one of their presentations, I think it was Karen. You may have heard that people don't quit companies, they quit managers. Ouch, that was so hard because here I was again doing the best I could do to be a good leader. I had some leadership training, probably like you guys, but when people would quit, I would still feel a personal sense of responsibility because people quit managers. And I can say now that as I'm coaching with my leaders, with 100% certainty, not a single one of them wakes up in the morning, gives me a call, and says, "Hey, Susan, I'd really like to be the reason somebody quits today." Not one. Well, the good news is the Korn Ferry Institute did a survey of why people leave jobs in a strong economy. Number one reason people leave jobs in a strong economy is they're bored. Whew, I'm off the hook. It's not me anymore. The number two reason people leave jobs in a strong economy is that it doesn't fit their company, the culture doesn't fit their values. Okay, that sounds pretty good. Now the bad news. Are you ready? Both number one and number two, particularly number one, are still directly connected to the manager. So what do you mean I'm bored? What are we as leaders supposed to do with people who are bored? Actually, I see this a lot. We want to help them grow. And one of the most dangerous traps that I see managers fall into is they spend all of their time with their poor performers and they virtually ignore their top talent. Okay, this is really dangerous. Your top talent wants to be challenged. Now, I don't think that managers are ignoring them on purpose. They're just thinking to themselves, he or she is a rock star and they don't really need my help. But I've got to work with these people over here because they do. This is a dangerous practice. I always tell my folks, feed your eagles. They want to be challenged. Help them grow. Number two, provide feedback. I am a believer in the weekly individual meeting with everybody, not just your sales team. If they are on your payroll, they are worth having a conversation with individually at least once a week. Now, I'm going to add something to this feedback that I want you to consider, and that's a word called meaningful feedback. So when I got my review many years ago, it was impactful, but not necessarily meaningful. So put some thought into when you're providing feedback to your people, how you can help them improve. Now, I will say that I never answer that question first. I always want them to tell me first, how are you going to what are you going to do about it? How are you going to change it? But I want to be ready to help guide them. So help them, provide some meaningful feedback. Help them succeed at working for you. Think about it this way. When was the last time you took on a project and said, I hope this fails miserably? Right? Nobody. When your people come to work for you, they're not hoping that either. They want to succeed. They want to please you as their leader. So what can you do to become the kind of leader that's easy for them to follow? So think back to the playground for just a moment. Remember, there was always one kid who was bigger and faster, and he got ahead of everybody else, he or she. That leader was not easy to follow. So how do we become easy to follow? Think about this for a minute. This is going to be a table exercise. I'm going to ask you to talk at your tables for just a moment. What if you could give your team the gift of knowing how to succeed at working for you? What would that do for them? So have a conversation at your table for like 30 seconds. What would it do for your team if they knew how to be successful working for you? Go ahead. Okay, so now let me change the question just a little bit. What would it do for you if your team knew how to be successful working with you? What would it do for you? How would that make things better or different for you as a leader? Have a conversation about that.
Are you going to want answers?
Okay, let's get a few examples. Just shout them out. I think Mike is there with the catch box. What do you have? What would it do for you and what would it do for them? Mike, over here.
Hi, Sue. It would, in terms of what it would do for you, you'd spend less time firefighting. So you'd spend less time in the urgent, important box, right? You'd spend more time in the low urgency, high importance box.
Okay.
You'd move faster, the team would move faster. More objectives would get met, or goals would get met. So.
More goals would get met, yeah?
Yeah.
You might actually be able to take a weekend off and not worry about it?
That'd be nice.
All right, anything else? Over here?
You would feel excited that your leadership skills were driving the ship in the right direction, that you were having an impact on your people, that you were less distracted and could spend more time with the people you wanted to be doing it with, and you'd be making more money.
Perfect, yeah. All those things are great, right? One more. We got time for one more?
I think it drives accountability from that standpoint, allows them to be in control of their success. They know where they're going. They've got a secure path. There's nothing worse than starting a job and not knowing where you're going, when you're onboarding and trying to figure it out on your own.
So true, so true. Those are great, great reasons. So all of that felt like it was really important for me to continue to dig into this thing that I call this missing link between the skills training that I had learned in my leadership classes and still making myself easier to follow, because there's something still wasn't connecting. Enter Brad McDonald. Now, if you don't know Brad is one of our Sandler coaches. In fact, he's right over there, I believe. Wave your hand, Brad. He's like, don't. Well, Brad, I knew was he's one of my coaches also, and I knew Brad as a successful franchise owner before he became one of our internal coaches. I also knew that he had a pretty interesting past. Now, I'm not going to try to tell you Brad's story because I wouldn't do it justice. But I will promise you that if you see him in the bar later tonight, it is well worth buying him a drink to get his story. So I invited Brad to come to one of my management classes and speak. And as he talked about what he did to prepare himself to take command of his first nuclear submarine in the U.S. Navy, I said, that is it. This leadership compass that Brad developed is the missing link between all of the skills training I had had and a way to articulate how to be easier to follow. Thank you, Brad. So here's what we're going to do. For the next few minutes, I'm going to take you through developing your own leadership compass. Now, you won't finish it today, but what I'd like you to do is just kind of begin to build a framework for what your compass might look like. There's a couple of rules. So for those of you that are rule followers, this will make you feel really comfortable. For those of you that are rule breakers, there's only 3. The first rule is it must be short and clear. Clear and concise. We want it to be clear and concise. This is not your memoirs. This is something you're actually going to share with people to read. So a page and a half, 2 pages at the most. The second rule is it must be written in the personal present tense. In other words, you're going to say things like I am, not I will be, or I desire to be. Personal present tense. Last but not least, if you don't mean it, don't write it. It must be your truth. Well, this is maybe the hardest part. The first step in your compass is to set your course. And any good navigator, any bad navigator for that matter, will tell you that the first thing that you have to do to set your course is you have to know where north is. A compass simply won't work without it. So my question for you is, what's your north? What is the purpose of your life? That's a pretty big question for 8 o'clock in the morning, don't you think? It may take you a little time to answer this. Some people know right away. For me, this has been a journey. I promise you that the purpose statement I wrote 4 years ago is very different than the purpose statement that I have today. 4 years ago, I spent a lot of time writing what I thought my purpose statement was supposed to be, and it was beautiful. It was well articulated. My English teacher would have been so proud. But I couldn't remember it. So if you can't remember it, that's a pretty good clue that you need to keep working on it. I want you to think of your purpose statement as kind of what Simon Sinek might have called your why. Or Steve Jobs might have said, it's your reason for dinging the universe. I'm a little more simple, and I'm just going to say it's your reason that gets you out of bed in the morning to do what you do. And that's a little more meaningful, a little deeper than I just want to provide for my family or make a good living. Because you could do that in a lot of different ways. But what gets you out of bed in the morning? I will share mine. It's just an example. It shouldn't be yours. Mine is to continue to be a force for good, empowering others to use their unique gifts to do what they love and love doing it. Now let me unpack that for you a little bit, because it's very carefully chosen words. This idea of a force, to me, I think the engineering term for it is a push or a pull. It represents taking action and a choice for the direction in which I take action, a force for good. It's also about my faith in action. The idea of empowering others, for me, this is about our own unique individual gifts and our connectedness to one another. It kind of reminds me of how I fit into the big picture. And I think that when I empower somebody else to do what only they can do, then they become better employees, better leaders, better parents, better global citizens. And in that way, I absolutely believe I'm changing the world. because I believe that changing the world is both an individual statement and a global statement. It's a both and. Now, when we talk about changing the world as being an individual and a global statement, let me ask you another question. When I'm lying in the bed on a cold, rainy, wintry morning, and maybe I'm a little sleepy, maybe a little tired, what do you think gets me out of bed? Thinking that I'm a Sandler sales trainer, which is an awesome role. I love it. Or do you think that being a force for good, empowering others, is what gets me out of bed? So what you need to do now is grab a sheet of paper. You can use your notes, you can use paper in the center of the table, whatever. And I just want you to draw a circle. Simple circle. Now I'm going to share with you the 8 elements that are in my leadership compass. And as they populate, I want to say there's nothing magic about my 8. So when you draw your circle, divide it into 8 sections, and you'll have time to choose whether or not these are the right sections for you. Maybe you need 10. Maybe you only need 5. But this is your leadership compass. This is the compass that you will use to guide yourself as a leader. Number 1, I want to think about what is my definition of leadership. Now, what I've learned over time is that if I ask everyone in this room to define leadership, there would be some common things that came up. You might say something like integrity, honesty, charisma, but the definition of leadership is very personal. So what I'd like you to think about doing is jotting down 3 or 4 words that just come to mind when you think about leaders. Now, think of it as somebody that you might follow even. My definition of leadership is simply the act of being followed, because I learned when I was playing Follow the Leader that if there was nobody following me, I wasn't really leading. The big difference here, though, is the Susan that was in the conference room many years ago, she was leading from authority. And now my definition, and sometimes that's appropriate, by the way. Somebody's running into the street and you yell, stop. That's your authority position, and that's okay. But what I'd rather do is lead from a position of mutual trust. So this is my definition of leadership. It doesn't have to be yours. The next are your operating principles. These are so fun. I want you to think of this as what you do as a leader. This defines the way you will behave. It's a little different from your cookbook. I'm not talking about the activities you will do, like weekly individual meetings and things like that. I'm talking about your code of conduct. You might think of this as your rules. I'll share some of mine. Now here's where it's also important for things to be written in the first person present tense. So, I am fair and just. That's on mine. That's very easy for me to look at in the morning and say, I am fair and just today. I can also look at that in the evening and say, was I fair and just today? So it's a code of conduct. The next one I actually took from Brad, which is I will be approachable and in control of myself. Because when people stop bringing you bad news, if they can't trust you with that, you're going to have much, much bigger problems. Believe the best first. This is kind of my philosophy. Here's what that means. Whenever there's a gap between what I expected from you and what I experienced, I have a choice as to what goes in that gap. I can choose to believe the best, or I can assume the worst. Let's pretend that you and I had an appointment to go meet a client, and I show up at the appointment and you're not there. Time goes by, you're still not there. Now, I expected you to be there, and what I experienced was different. The meeting starts, you're still not there. Now, at every moment, I have a choice as to what I put in that gap. And so my default position is that I'm going to believe the best. Now, when I get back to the office, and I find out that something really important happened that prevented you from being there. Maybe you had a car accident. Something really important happened. Don't I feel better that I believe the best? Right? On the other hand, I can assume the worst. And I can be all knotted up and mad during my meeting so that I'm not concentrating. But if I get back to the office and I find out that you were, in fact, just irresponsible and you didn't set your alarm clock, this is where the next one comes in, which is that I will protect your identity while giving you role feedback. And for those of you that aren't familiar with Sandler, what that means is I will give you feedback on your role performance without attacking you as a person. That's part of my code of conduct as a leader. Number 3, expectations. This is your opportunity to tell people not only what they can expect of you, but what you expect of them. So think of these as a two-way street. This is, click, there we go. For example, if I expect somebody to be a lifelong learner, I might say, learn, read a book a month. That's one of the rules in our company, read a book a month. I also have an expectation that no is a qualified and acceptable response in my company. I might tell you no, you might tell me no. A client might tell you no. I do have a tendency to ask a lot of people, so it's okay for my people to say, whoa, Susan, I've got a lot on my plate right now. This is really important. So those are expectations. Priorities. This is the thing this is awesome. This is the thing that lets you take a vacation. Because now, if you can tell people, whether you're a company leader or a department leader, if you can tell people what are the most important things that they need to be doing every day, no matter what, if you're not around and they're questioning, should I be doing this or not, you give them a guideline to be able to do those things. For mine and my company, it's this. We have 3. We generate revenue for our company. We empower our clients to generate revenue for their companies. Or we empower personal and professional growth for ourselves. Now, if you're doing one of those 3 things in my company, you're probably doing something you should be doing. But don't miss the fact that these are numbered. Because if they're not done in order, if we get them out of order, then there's no way we can continue to be a force for good. So when I'm away, people know exactly what the priorities are. Now it's your turn. Take a moment. Don't try to figure out all of them. Just take a minute and jot down 3 or 4 words that come to mind that will help you remember what kind of your first thoughts in each of these categories. Just take 30 seconds or so. Jot that down. Okay, next we're going to talk about business values. Now, business values, I want you to think of this. This is not necessarily what's written on the wall of your company. These are the things that you value in your department. What values do you want people to have? What's important to you? So be sure you share this with your people. One thing I want you to really consider on these values is make them actionable. So, for example, sometimes people will say, I value integrity. That's awesome, but it's not very actionable. So think about saying something like, do the right thing even when it's hard. Maybe if honesty is a value, we say in our company, do what you say when you say you will do it. Keep your promises, not just to other people, but to yourself. We talk about growth. We say learn something new every day. In terms of humility, we say, admit when you're wrong and apologize. Non-negotiables. This one should be a pretty short list. These are the things that you would be willing, as my friends in HR would say, to make someone available to the industry. So this is a pretty short list. These are your non-negotiables. For me, one of ours is that we're a no-drama zone. We will respect each other and treat each other in a courteous manner and get along at work. If this one becomes a problem, you're probably not going to be a good fit for us. Personal idiosyncrasies. If you know that you're the kind of person that can't communicate until you've had 4 cups of coffee, it's okay to let your team know that. On the other hand, if you're an early bird and you expect and for you, if people aren't 15 minutes early, they're late, you might want to share that with them too. For mine, it's the webcams on for meetings. We teach this stuff, so we turn our webcams on even if our clients don't. And nothing drives me crazier than to schedule a meeting with somebody after looking at their Outlook calendar, and then they come in and go, I can't make that meeting because whatever. Just keep your calendar current. Commitment. Commitment, like expectations, this is a two-way street. It's a little stronger. You want to think about this is what you're committed to and what kind of commitment you expect from them. For us, it's I will never ask more from you than you see from me. I will provide you all of the training resources that you need to be successful. Your commitment must be to do the work. So take a minute, jot down 3 or 4 ideas that come to mind under those 3 categories. Four categories, I guess. So you may be wondering, well, what's the point of all this? It seems kind of heady and philosophical. What in the world how could I possibly benefit? Well, I have some thoughts about that. I can share what it's done for us in our company. Number one, last year was the best year we've had financially in the history of our company. But financial is only one measure of success. I can tell you that having clarity on my purpose fuels my internal drive like nobody's business. We know as business leaders that we have to bring all of the energy with us, and we supply the energy for our company often, and that's not always easy to do. So connecting and knowing my life's purpose and connecting that to what I do is like throwing gas on my internal drive. The code of conduct, the operating principles that I mentioned, if you think about that, that creates a pretty specific culture in our company, which attracts only people that want that kind of culture. Think back to reason number 2 while people leave companies. For me, it's selfishly, it's freedom from micromanagement. I hated that. Anybody else? Yeah, thought so. And this may be the best reason of all. I asked my colleagues, since I've been working on this leadership compass over the past several years, had they noticed anything? Had it helped them in any way? And I'm going to paraphrase a little bit, but the answer came back essentially, yeah, I feel valued. I feel trusted. I feel like I can make decisions when you're not around. And I know how to do that. I know what the parameters are. In other words, I feel like I'm in control of my success or autonomy. I'm a Daniel Pink fan, and he said that when people have autonomy, they live fuller, richer lives. Totally believe that. Back to the conference room, sometimes people ask me, well, Susan, what happened when you left that conference room? And sadly, I didn't have this tool then. And by the way, neither did the president of my company, and he is a great leader at that time. He was an awesome leader. So don't judge him by that one incident. And so sometimes I think, what would have been different had I known this then? But you know what? I can't change time. I can't go back. And my dad used to say, Susan, everybody leads somewhere. Maybe the better question is, now that you do know, what kind of a leader will you be? Will you be a good leader or a bad leader? That's what he used to ask me. And so not much change for those guys. But I do believe that we can go and make a big difference in the lives of people that we work with now. Now, you have access to these slides, and here's kind of your summary slide of all the things you can go back and work on, because I did tell you this would be a journey. You wouldn't be able to get it done today. As you work on your leadership compass, you might want to think about enlisting the help of a trusted advisor. It's kind of hard. And they'll often help you find what your strengths are and help you to narrow down your purpose. Sandler also has some great resources for this. There's a worksheet in the Sales Mastery Kit and in the Leadership Kit called Who Am I? Get with your trainer. They can help you work through that as well. Once you've done it, you'll want to revisit it often. It will change as you grow. Your compass will change and grow. There'll be some things that you'll find you won't waver from. But by and large, there'll be some changes. Then share it. Share it with your team. Teach them how to do this. Help them, equip them so that when they're ready to lead, they know how to be a leader that's easy to follow as well. So now that you're equipped, and now that you know how, and you've seen this tool, I want to just ask you to go and be the kind of leader that's easy to follow, that people want to follow. I have a few minutes. I can take some questions if we want, or any questions? No? Sorry, I can't see if there are. No? It's got one right here.
Go on.
Susan, thanks. Great comments. So, sharing it with your team, how'd you position that? What'd that look like?
That's a really good question. And my team is small, so I just sat down with them and said, hey, I've been working on this. It's something that I'm trying to develop to be a better leader. I think it's okay to be open and honest with your people and just say, I'm trying to get better myself. Here's my first pass at it. I even asked them for input. What things would you change? What did I write down that they didn't think seemed really accurate? And they gave me some good feedback on that. Yeah. So hang on a second. Uh-huh.
So when you're writing out this compass statement, do you write it out point by point, or is it written kind of as a conversation? Or? Oh,
yeah, great question. I think that depends on your style. I am a high D, so I do everything in bullet points. But one of my other clients wrote a beautiful letter. And so I think it really just depends on your communication style. But that's a really good question. Brad, did you?
Hi, new to Sandler. Thanks for teaching a very good tool. I had a manager very early in my life who asked me to read a book called 1 Minute Manager. Basically set expectation in 1 minute. It worked very well for me, expectations were great. So I've been doing it for a while. The first day, I basically write down how I would like you to spend your 40 hours. These are the key things that have to get done. I haven't followed the script. There's a lot more detail here. I feel people don't buy in. They all agree with you in the meeting and they do what they want. And how do you overcome that resistance where people think it's a flavor of the month, it will go away, and they expect you as a manager to make sure they live up to it?
So I didn't hear the last part. They think it'll go away and they expect you to do what?
So our next session is accountability. What happens after this?
That's great.
Okay, fair enough.
Yeah, great segue. And so I do think I'll answer just a little bit to say it is about you being consistent with it. And it's also it goes back to if you don't mean it, don't write it. And be committed to going back and following up. And the next session is definitely your answer. So yeah. Marcus?
How do you create the ground rules so that you can empower people to make decisions, so that you can delegate? What was the process that you went through in your business?
I literally sat down with the compass things and just said, okay, what are the things that are important? To me, I took are you talking about the operating principles? Is that where you're? Yeah. So I just sort of said, what's important to me as a leader? What things, how do I want to behave? And again, it was a lot of feedback with them.
So you talked a lot about growth in the beginning.
Go ahead. Oh, we're over here.
Sorry, can't see.
You don't have to look.
There we go.
It's okay. I'm a high D too.
That's okay.
I can really relate to what you were saying when you said you have high expectations and all of this, and you were talking about trying to create that growth. What are some of the steps that you implemented to your people to help them start to grow? Because I find that to be one of the most challenging factors is helping people to grow. You want to try and give them all the tools and you feel like you're following the system, but sometimes they get real stagnant or you have trouble getting them started, or what are some top takeaways you could give us for that?
Yeah, so that's a great question. And as a high D, this is where my things always fell apart because I gave them, hey, here's what I want you to do, right? Here's the roadmap. But I wasn't always really good at following up with it. So I think part of that is the accountability. Like I held myself accountable to saying, for example, if it's read one book a month, then in my meetings, I ask, hey, I'm reading this book. What are you reading? So I think it's also leading by example. And when I talked about expectations earlier, one of the things is if you're somebody who wants everybody on time, then you have to be on time for meetings that you have with them. So you can't say, get to work at 8 o'clock, and then when you got a meeting with them, show up 15 minutes late and unprepared. So I think some of it's just being the example as well.
Hey, Susan, this is Ben. Quick question. I have a team of about 15 people, ranging in age from 22 to, say, 35. I'm struggling with the autonomy piece and how much autonomy to give. Some people are really self-motivated and some people aren't, but I want to be consistent. So I'm just curious your thoughts there.
Really good question. Autonomy, Daniel Pink talks about it as you give it to people with training wheels in the beginning. And I do think that some people are going to require more than just a weekly individual meeting. And so you kind of have to figure out what's the right feedback cadence for the individual that you're working with and determine how much autonomy you can give them based on that. And as they get better, then you can give them, but if you give everybody total autonomy in the beginning, you'll have chaos. So think about autonomy with training wheels.
Hi, Susan. Great session, thank you. When you went through this process and shared this with your team and asked for feedback, did you also encourage them to do something similar?
I did, yeah, great question. I think it's important for them to do it too. Like I said, everybody leads somewhere, even if it's just on the soccer field. Right? So I've got 2 minutes. You want to wrap? Good? You more? You guys were a fantastic audience. Thank you so much. Go lead.
Put your hands together for Susan Sykes, everybody. Susan.